welcome to the Murder and Mystery Podcast. I'm your host, Summer. So today I have a very interesting, very mysterious missing persons account for you. This is a really interesting story of a young man who went missing in 2008. So today we're going to talk about Brandon Swanson. Brandon Swanson was born to Brian and Annette Swanson on January 20th, 1989 in Marshall, Minnesota. He graduated Marshall High School in 2007 and went to Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, Minnesota, where he was studying wind turbines. So Brandon had just finished his first year of college, his first 2 semesters of college on May 13th, 2008. Class was finally over and he decided to stay in Canby that afternoon and evening and celebrate with his friends. It was reported that he went to 2 different parties and he was seen drinking alcohol, but his friends said that he didn't seem overly intoxicated and appeared to be okay to drive. So after this long day of finals and finishing up everything for his classes, and then an evening of partying, he makes the decision to go ahead and drive home from Canby to Marshall. This is about 30 miles, so should be less than an hour's drive. The drive is a straight shot down Highway 68, and this is a route that he had taken every day when going back and forth to classes. So he knew this route very well, but for some reason that night, Brandon didn't take the highway, the straight shot. He took back roads. I would still assume that, growing up in the area, driving that way every day, he was probably pretty familiar with these back roads too, you would think. And I wonder if, because he had been drinking, even though his friends say that he wasn't visibly intoxicated, maybe he was feeling a little buzzed and feeling like, maybe he needed to stay off the highway and avoid any police officers. So maybe that's why he took the back roads. I don't know. I'm just speculating there. But he decided to take back roads. And a little before 2 o'clock in the morning, he calls his parents. He tells his parents that he has driven off into a ditch and he can't get his car out. His car's fine, he's just stuck, and asks them to come and get him. He explains to them that he thinks he's near the town of Lind, which is southwest of Marshall. It's quite a ways from Canby. It's probably at least 30 miles or so from Canby, but he says that he's near this town, he can see the lights, and asks them to come and get him. So his parents leave their home and drive to Lind, and in looking at maps and where his parents live in Marshall, like it looks like they're just right outside of Marshall, and where Lind is, it's maybe 5-10 minutes from where they live. So he was pretty close to home. He thought it was just before this town. I'm sure that they knew this area really well. So they say, okay, we're jumping in the truck. We're coming to get you right now. So Brian and Annette leave the house, not quite 2 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, but they're still on the phone with their son. They kept him on the phone. He's talking. It doesn't say what they were talking about, but they just kept him there so that, he could help guide them to where he is. And they get to the area where they think he should be, where he said that he was, and they're not seeing any cars. So they think, well, it's dark. Maybe he's a little further down. So they say, hey, Brandon, get in, turn on your lights, and flash your lights at us so that we can see where you're at, because we're not seeing you. Brandon says he does this, and his parents are like, we still don't see you. Here, let me flash my lights at you, and you tell me if you can see us. And so both Brandon and his parents are flashing their lights back and forth at each other, and they can't see each other. Well, there's a good reason for this, because Brandon was not where he thought he was. In fact, he was 25 miles north of where he believed that he was. So his parents are out here on this road. He's not there. He gets frustrated. Parents are frustrated. It's late. I'm sure everybody's tired. And he says, look, I see lights. That's where the town of Lind is. I will meet you in the parking lot of this local bar that they all know. Yeah, I will go there and I will meet you there. They say, okay. And he starts walking. Well, his parents, still thinking that he's somewhere in this area and somehow they're just not seeing him, they keep him on the phone, and I'm sure they're still looking and they're trying to figure out. They're probably driving up and down the road. They're calling out his name. They're saying, hey, where are you now? Do you see us? We're driving on the road. But they can't find him. And about 47 minutes into this conversation, a little after 2:30 in the morning, Brandon, who's talking to his parents as he's walking, interrupts himself mid-sentence and says, oh, shit. And that's the last they hear of their son. The phone is still on, but they hear nothing but silence. They keep calling to him, keep trying to get him. So finally, they hang up, not knowing what to do. They hang up the phone, and then they keep trying to call him back, but they're not able to get a hold of him. So I'm assuming that throughout this time, they are still driving around. They probably went to this bar where he was going to meet them, driving up and down the roads, all possible ways that he could have possibly gotten to the town of Lind, and he's not there. They aren't finding him. So their last contact with their son was 2:30 that morning. He's not answering his phone. They can't get a hold of him. So finally at 6:30 in the morning, they go to the police station in Lind and tell police that their son is missing and try to explain everything that's gone on. But they aren't met with the same frantic, oh my gosh, something happened, we've got to go find him, that the parents are feeling. In fact, police just kind of laughed it off and was like, he's a young man. It's not unusual for kids this age to just not come home. He just finished his last day of college. He's blowing off steam. It's not that big a deal. Even told him that he had the right to be missing. Now, I believe most of the time for adults, they say you have to wait 24 hours before they will even start looking for somebody who's missing, because they have the right to disappear. And after 24 hours, if there's no good reason that they would be missing, they might start looking for them. But in this case, the parents were still very persistent. I mean, the way that he got off the phone, the fact that he called them for help, and then their last contact, and then he's not answering the phone, and he was out walking, and they aren't sure where he is. They can't find his car. So finally, mid-morning, police decide, okay, let's go ahead and do a quick search for this kid. And I think they probably thought they would find him asleep in his car or at a friend's house or something. But nothing came up. They looked all throughout the town. They looked outside of town. They couldn't find his car. They couldn't find him. And so finally, they started working on getting the cell phone records to see if they could narrow down this search and figure out exactly where he was at. Of course, it takes time to get cell phone records. And when they finally did, they found that Brandon's phone had last registered on Highway 68 close to Taunton, which is northwest of Marshall and 25 miles north of Lind. So this is the halfway point, or about halfway between Canby and Marshall along Highway 68, the highway that he should have been traveling to get home. And this is a long way from where he had told his parents that he was. So there's no reason that 25 miles away from here, his cell phone is pinging off of a tower that far. No, that wouldn't happen, right? So they start looking there. Finally, on May 15th, they have been searching in this area, but that's still a big area, okay? We've got this tower. His phone last pinged off this tower. They needed to be able to narrow that search down, but it took time. May 15th, so 3 days after he went missing, they were able to narrow down and said that his phone had been within 5 miles of a cell phone tower that was located on the intersections of County Routes 3 and 10 near Minneota. So this is a small town up by Taunton, still on that Highway 68, still in that area, but the intersection where this tower was kind of out in the country. It was out in these back roads area. So he was within 5 miles of this. Of course, you have this tower, and then you have this circle around this tower that he could be 5 miles in any direction within that circle. So that's a lot of area to try and find. But they're searching the area, and they finally find his car. His car was found on Lion Lincoln Road, which is a gravel road off of Highway 68. Now, it is in this back roads, and it is a way that he could have driven home, but still a long way from where he thought that he was. And he had been off the road. His car had kind of high centered, and one of the wheels was off the ground, so he couldn't get traction. He couldn't get off. But the car was totally fine. There was nothing wrong with the car. The car was locked. The keys weren't there. But his glasses were left behind. His glasses were left in the car. So Brandon had had a childhood injury to one of his eyes and had left his left eye legally blind. And he had to have glasses to help with depth perception. And he had left his glasses in the car, but he had taken his keys, and there was no signs of any type of struggle, no signs of any injury. However, because this was a gravel road and there's high grass and stuff on the sides, there was no way to tell which direction he went. He didn't leave footsteps that they could, determine what direction he had walked. So they know where his car is. They know that he's a long way from where he said that he was, but he's still not found. And he had lost contact with his parents in such a scary way. Police and his parents continued trying to contact his phone, and his phone showed that it was on for a good 24 hours after that last contact. But when they would try to ring his cell phone, it just kept going to voicemail. It would ring and ring and ring and go to voicemail. Nobody was answering. Eventually, they brought in scent dogs to continued their ground search. They did an aerial search. They were bringing in every resource they could find to help find Brandon. The dogs did pick up on a scent, on Brandon's scent, and they followed a 3-mile scent trail that went down these country roads, and through field and into the Yellow Medicine River. Now, the river was deep in places, was up to 10 feet deep in some places, but the place that the dogs took them to was shallower, and they were able to go across the river and onto the other side to a gravel road where they lost the scent. It was said that Brandon's scent was also picked up on some farm equipment, but unfortunately they couldn't get permission to search that property of the farmer that owned the equipment because they had cows. They didn't want the dogs in there scaring the cows. They didn't want people messing around. So there were lots of reasons that these searches initially weren't done on these different properties. So after no signs of Brandon were found during that first initial search, most of the searches had been discontinued. However, the sheriff for the town of Lynn continued to walk the banks of the Yellow Medicine River every day for 30 days. He went out there every single day and walked along the riverbanks looking for some sign that Brandon had possibly gone into the river and drowned and his body was washing up. His parents left the porch light on in case he found his way home, and other people also continued to search for the missing boy. In the fall, the search picked back up. Once the harvest had been done, some of the other area landowners allowed police to come in after they'd harvest all their crops so they could come and not disturb things and mess up their fields, but they could search. This continued until snow came, and then they had to stop the search because of the snow, and then it picked back up in the spring after the snow had melted and before the crops were planted. And this cycle of investigation continued until 2011. By the end of 2011, an area of 122 square miles had been thoroughly searched, but there was still no signs of Brandon. They brought in boats, they were dredging the river, looking to see if his body could be found. There was nothing, no evidence that Brandon had been there, no pieces of clothing, no shoes, nothing, no signs of Brandon was found. So one theory is that he walked into the river and he drowned. However, his mom, Annette, pointed out that the search dogs followed his scent to the shallow part of the river, through the river, and to a gravel road. So, according to her, she is very positive that he made it across that river. He did not fall into the river and drown because they did find the scent on the other side of the river. There are multiple cisterns in that area, and some of them are uncovered, like well-type things in the ground. And so it's theorized that he could have fallen into one of these wells or these cisterns. Another theory is that he came upon someone in the dark who killed him and hid his body. Now, because there are still some land area that certain landowners were not allowing them to search, even between crops and things. They weren't allowing them to go onto their land for one reason or another, and there wasn't enough evidence to say that he could possibly have been there so that they could get a warrant to force the landowners to let them search. So it is possible that his body was hidden somewhere on private land and they just aren't able to find it because the landowner isn't allowing him on there. Okay, so the last theory is that Brandon wanted to disappear. He used this opportunity to mislead his parents and leave the area and not come back, not have any contact with his family. Now, his parents, his family, his friends, They all say there's no way that this happened, that there was no reason for him to disappear. He wouldn't have disappeared. And it seems really odd that he would call his parents and ask them to come and get him and send them on this wild goose chase to just disappear. If he was planning to disappear, why didn't he just drive off from class that day and not come back? Why make contact with his family? Why do all of this? Although he has not been seen since his disappearance, there has been some good things that came from this. And the good thing is Brandon's Law. Annette Swanson, Brandon's mother, was so disappointed by the response she received from police when she first went in to report her son missing. You know, she's distraught, her husband's distraught. Their son had abruptly gotten off the phone, you know, while he's walking. They don't know where he's at, they can't find him. And he's just walking along somewhere and says, "Oh shit," and then nothing else. There's silence on the phone. They can't call him back. That to me says there's an emergency. Something bad happened. And that's the way they were feeling too. However, police just kind of blew it off. You know, he's an adult. He's fine. And it wasn't until later that they finally got somebody to listen to them and to understand that, yes, this is an emergency. You know, we need to go find him. We need to do this search. And even then, they did it a lot quicker than ordinarily they would search for a missing adult, probably because of the way that he went missing. However, it wasn't quickly enough. They weren't on it immediately. So Annette worked with government officials, and in May 2009, Brandon's Law was put into place. So this law amended the state's missing child program by changing the word child to person. So now it's a missing person program. And it allows law enforcement to determine if a missing adult is in immediate danger. If they're in a dangerous situation, then they can jump on it faster than if, say, you know, your 20-year-old child just didn't come home from school that day, that evening, and they're 2 hours late. It could be anything with that. But in this situation, in situations like this where there's a possibility of danger, they can jump on it before that 24-hour period. They also enabled law enforcement to have access to cell phone records and access to devices of that missing person, which normally, because they're an adult, they would need warrants, and it takes time to get warrants. You know, they have to go before a judge. They have to show, hey, this person's in danger. We believe they're in danger. We believe that these records or this device could hold information to help find them. The judge has to sign off on it, and then they can execute that and get that information. This allows them to push that faster by saying this person is believed to be in danger, and they get access to those records and they can have access to those devices. And finally, it made it mandatory that in this situation where they believe a missing adult is in danger, they have to notify nearby officials. So this means that police officers in nearby towns and stuff are also on the lookout for this person and can help in this search. Basically, what they did was they amended the law in Minnesota so that when a missing adult is thought to be in danger, they treat it the same way they would do a missing minor. They treat them like a child, and they jump on it and they look at all avenues. So to this day, there's still no signs of Brandon Swanson. He hasn't contacted anybody. Nobody's seen him. His body hasn't been found. There's no evidence to point them in a direction where his body might be. He's just dropped off the face of the earth. So if you have any information, if you know what could have happened, if you've heard somebody talk about doing something to Brandon Swanson, please call local authorities and let them know so that this family can have closure. Until next time. Bye.